Hello, everyone. Welcome to Living in Undead Labor, the second part of Sweet Pea, Your Other Progeny, a program curated by Jeannine Tang for the Singapore Biennale that we've named Natasha. Please note that this program will be recorded and the video will be posted to Sam's YouTube channel later. We welcome your participation throughout this program. If you have any questions or would like to make a comment, please send them in using the Q&A function, which you can find on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I think we will be starting our program soon, so I'll make a few introductions and then I will hand over to Jeannine. My name is Nida Gauss, and I'm one of the 4 co-artistic directors for the Singapore Biennale, along with June Yap, Ala Yunus, and Bina Choi. I'm pleased to welcome you to the second part of this conversation, or the series of programs curated by Jeannine, as I mentioned, called Sweet Pea, Your Other Progeny. In this panel, we bring together artist Aarti Sunder, who is also part of Natasha, and media theorist David Bering-Porter, for presentations of their recent work on digital images and online platforms spanning mTurk and social media. Their presentations will be followed by a conversation conducted and moderated by Jeannine on convergences between their art and writing across the histories of digital ethnography, critical approaches to the moving image, and regenerative media, questions of living and undead labor. Jeannine Tang is an art historian of modern and contemporary art and visual culture, teaching at the New School's Eugene Lang College in New York City. For Natasha, her project, which is a series of public programs, thinks through the metaphor and history of sweet pea, their cultural significance as an affectation, endearment, and scientific history as organic matter and experimental material. The programs reflect on how histories of smart technology, artificial and non-human intelligence are entangled with questions of reproduction, inheritance, and racial science, and the ways in which artists and scientists have not only traced such genealogies, but imagined and enacted kin cultures and interspecies relations differently. I'm going to hand over to Jeannine, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nida. I'm so grateful to you and the other artistic directors of the Singapore Biennial, the staff of the Singapore Art Museum, Verilus Center, and SAM Residencies for all of their support of this event and program. And so, hi everyone, I'm Jeannine Tang, zooming in from the unceded lands of the Lenape. By way of an audio description, I'm a person of Chinese descent with short dark hair, wearing a black sweater and metal-rimmed glasses. Thank you all for joining us this late evening and early morning. And I'm really excited to be featuring the work of David Bering-Porter and artist Aarti Sunder for a conversation on ghost work and crowd work, living in undead labor. And I want to mark that thinking on these topics also follows in the wake of living labor's resurrection and aesthetics of the past 10 years. Many artists, curators, and scholars have turned to Marx's notion of living labor, including people like Kelly Chung, Josh Lubin-Levy, Elisa Schwartz, and others, who have summoned Marx's distinction between labor as productive of goods, services, and commodities, and labor as capacity sold by workers for a wage. In the words of Lubin-Levy and Schwartz, quote, living labor could in this sense be further understood as the performance of the body under structures of capitalism and within the temporality of the capitalist mode of production. Living labor bristles with a spontaneity capable of fracturing, stalling, and overwhelming the central drive of capitalism's expansion, end quote. If these resurrections of Marxist living labor have so frequently and understandably been tethered to life performance, including forms of endurance and duration, stressing reproductive labor, social forms of assembly and gathering, such resurrections of living labor have theorized the 21st century's chronic financial crises, the slow violence of flexible and casualized forms of labor, now endemic in our public infrastructures, universities, and schools, and contested by strikes up and down and well across the coast of Turtle Island. Tonight, in addition to these, I hope we'll also turn to the aesthetics of the machine, particularly those cybernetic technologies whose animation as goods, services, and commodities are today are lively dead. If, according to Marx, living labor, quote, seizes upon things to rouse them from their death sleep, end quote, making real and effective values of possibility and capacity, that is how capitalism also turns money into a commodity through a labor process by, quote, incorporating living labor with their dead substance, end quote. This incorporation of dead substance with living labor converts value to capital, and what Marx has called, quote, a live monster that is fruitful and multiplies. He would famously state that capital is dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks, end quote. If his capital was metaphorically cast as a vampire thirsting for the living blood of labor, this history of capital and our histories of technology are rife with such metaphors of machinic vampirism, ghostliness, and monstrosity, particularly in a contemporary techno-symbolic age of sentient bots and powerful AIs wreaking vengeance upon humanity for its supremacist fantasies of mastery, in which human-machine relations are so often structured in dynamics of command and control. But tonight, we're also going to imagine some other kinds of metaphor and some other kinds of relation to machines, platforms, interfaces, and their intelligence, including and complicating how imaginaries of dead substance are fired up by living labor. And so I'm excited to also build upon earlier cyberfeminist histories and legendary writing by writers such as Lisa Nakamura, who prior to our contemporary discussions on techno-precarity would in 2009 explore how labor was racialized in World of Warcraft, how Asian farmers were figured as uninvited guest workers within the culture and productions of massively multiplayer online role-playing games. In her analysis, the logic of property and possessive individualism would prohibit farmers from accumulating avatarial capital, in which humans were not only dispossessed of their humanity, but also the information and data that they would generate. And so building on the platform analytics of thinkers such as Nakamura, but also Coco Fusco, Sandy Stone, Trevor Schultz, Eugene Thanker, and many others who've theorized today's digital labor and labor, while interrogating living and deathly conditions of work within and behind the platform and interfaces that are our commodities and services today, including this one that we're on. I'm delighted to bring to you Aarti Sunder's recent film on ghost cuts and Amazon's Mechanical Turk and David Bering-Porter's coining of the term undead labor. So thank you very much, David and Aarti, for helping us think through our metaphors and relations between humans and machines, the living and the dead, the ways we labor environmentally with technology, and how we live and work beyond the grave. We'll first hear from Aarti, followed by David, and then have a conversation after that. And so please feel free to drop any questions and comments into the Q&A, and we'll get to these later. And so I'm now going to welcome Aarti Sunder, whose research and practice lies at the crossroads of digital humanities and contemporary art. She's interested in the fictions arising from investigating situated experiences and asking if these help us rethink the ways in which we can understand technology and our relationship with it. Aarti focuses on contemporary labor practices, the fictional edges of protest, myth, and digital terrestrial play. She's interested in problematizing the determined linearity of progress inscribed within the promise of the algorithm, technological prowess, and a quantifiable future. By examining a globalized framework of precarious labor, non-human exhaustion, and storytelling at the strategic intersections of power, knowledge, and aesthetics, she believes in telling better stories of fictions, past, present, and future. And she's just produced the publication, Performing Specters, Deliberate Images, Intended Metaphors. Congrats, Aarti, and thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm very excited to have this conversation. So what I will do is I will share screen, but before that, I just want to tell you that I'm looking here because my text is here. So I have to sort of share here and look here. So I'm just looking a little off screen because of that. So I will start. I will speak a little bit, share sound, share a little bit of video and a few images. And yeah, we can take it from there. So my work recently has been looking at a particular online platform, which is it's like an online marketplace, which it's like a global. I mean, it's global within its constraints. So I will explain all of that, but it falls in the category of what ghost work is, and ghost work is it's a broad term to refer to intentionally hidden and opaque forms of labor. The way it is used here refers to a digital assembly line of distributed workers who can be accessed via online platforms, such as the one that I did study, which was Mechanical Turk, which is run by Amazon, Cloudflower, Clickworker. The more recent ones are Fiverr. I mean, I think these guys are slightly have better ethical standards, but they're smaller in scale. Upwork is also one of them. The businesses, universities, individuals who use these platforms employ between 1 to thousands of people across the world to complete work the software cannot do. A lot of the labor on such platforms is geared towards completing incomplete data sets, such as image tagging and description, organizing online content, transcribing and transliterating language, which is not just English, almost every language, I would say, but largely Indian languages, Spanish, English, and real-time data analytics, giving opinions in the form of surveys and determining different kinds of online content on social media platforms, like determining hate speech or tagging bots kind of thing, but we'll get to that. The word ghost here indicates that it is not just the physical absence of a person doing a particular job, but the pretense that such a person does not even exist. The silent laboring hand behind the magic of technology, the silence that requires spontaneity, creativity, and cultural interpretation. In this category of work, starting with the body, we see the movement from laboring in proximity to others, that is, say, on a shop floor, or the precursor to this was the IT building, where you had cubicles and you had people working in the same physical location as other people, towards an atomized space in almost total isolation. So, meaning that now we know what it is. The idea of working from home is sort of very prevalent because of the pandemic. But prior to this also, working from home was a very large part of a lot of labor. As scales of production increase, workers have lesser and lesser information of exactly how they're contributing to the workflow process. And that means in the sense that very often you're working on a very tiny part of something, and then you're not quite sure how that fits into a larger framework as to why the work was given to you in the first place, or why you're doing it, and what the repercussions of that work actually is. So this falls, one of the reasons this is super attractive to a lot of people is because you have flexible working hours and you can determine your own level of, you can calibrate your exhaustion. But the reason this is so prevalent and so important to modern day, towards how we've structured the way we collect material, different kinds of material or data or whatever you want to call that chunk of the amount of, I don't want to say data too much, but just the word material may be sufficient for now. The solution has always been to maintain an always available workforce, ensuring work expendability at an increasingly alarming rate. So this particular platform, MTurk, is a particularly notorious one, and it's been studied quite a bit. So my interest in it was first of all, to understand exactly how it works, the bureaucratic nature of the process, of the work, how the interface looks, how you set up a job, how you do a job. and trying to, as well as say talking to people. I spent a lot of time talking to people who use the platform in different ways. And to also, it is also, I mean, I work as an artist, so it's also to understand the different levels of abstraction and what is concrete within this particular platform. And what does data actually refer to? What do you mean when you say the word data? And what does labor mean? What does image making mean? So I spend a lot of time on the platform. I use the platform as well. You set up what is known as a HIT, which is human intelligent task, meaning that, like I said, it's the work that requires spontaneity, creativity, and cultural interpretation, because the kind of work that's not yet been, for lack of a better word, automated or codified in some manner or the other. So what I will do now is just to give you an idea of how the platform looks and what it actually means to work on the platform. I will share screen with a short video that I made, which goes into a lot of the work that I did over the past couple of years, talking to people. It largely comprises of interviews, and I use a few automated scripts that allow me to look at when speech is anticipated, right? So these are very widely prevalent apps that allow you to say live transcribe. But imagine that people within the platform were actually used at some point, or even say you have these very common images of what AI imagery is today. So these kinds of images are, and text and speech are probably being sort of trained on the platform itself. So I'm going to share. I think I forgot to sound share. Oh.
Oh my God, do you want to see something weird? They want you to put a box around the motorcycle, basically. But it has to be like absolutely perfect or they will deny you. I've done a bunch where they wanted you to put boxes around people's faces at Black Lives Matter protests, which felt kind of weird. Oh my God, something bad, right? Like law enforcement or something else. Like it felt like it would be not for a good thing. This one's fun. You have to say what the danger level is. I know, right? I don't know. Danger is likely. See, that's why I don't do them, because how can you tell? But there could be though, so they can reject you if they think you're wrong. That looks like danger, right? Oh, there you are. Yeah. Hi. It's so nice to meet you. But yeah. No. One day I did a buttload. It made you look at people's faces, and it said, "Are they wearing a mask? If they're wearing a mask, what part of their face is it covering?" And you had to push 1, 2, or 3. I got 1 penny, and I have 113 pages of it. How much did I make on that day? June 15th, $38. I actually found something new, and I wanted to show you because there's a thing called, I said I wouldn't tell anybody what it was called. So this has been super interesting though, because they drop in huge batches. Like this one is 120K, and you just do them until they're gone, basically. And basically we're trying to train bots So for instance, this is, how much do you make? 35 cents for 5 pages. You train AI basically. They're kind of mean. Like when they mess up, they're like, where's the toxic ones? These ones. Because, you know, it's a little subjective because somebody's saying this comment was weird because they're saying if they have like Nazi profile picture, is that bad? Depending on who is judging things. Yeah, because it was hard to tell because, you know, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. So it's like, is that toxic? Yeah, I really wish I knew who is running this. I really don't. I Googled and they're in California, but that's all I know. So I wish. Yeah, no, I wish because that, you know, that reminds me of the people who want us to watch gore, but for 30 cents. But no, God, some of them really aren't toxic at all because AIs can't tell the difference. Like that's not, I would say, that's like just talking to each other. You have to watch everything. And then they say animals. So I will call that a protected attack against African Americans.
And I will just also show you a little bit about of the automated scripts that was there.
Myself as a paid contractor, independent contractor, independent. That's right.
My role is to, of course, number one, give answers that AI does not advance to the point there would be much trust in AI. Because by far most of the questions I'm asking them to are my opinion. They want me to rate how I feel about certain people or groups. Not very much of it is cognitive tests like adding numbers. It's mainly giving opinions so they can eventually get a consensus from workers so they know what to program into AI. And once they get more and more detailed information to how humans behave, that way AI can mimic humans better over time. And that's sort of what MTurf does.
MTurf can be divided into 2 kinds of work. One is surveys and the other is this data entry kind of work that could include audio transcription and all, converting these PDFs or pictures to Word files or something of that sort. Surveys, as the customers are mostly from the US and North America side, so they set a demographic filter that they get workers from that side. So we don't get that kind of work, but that's the lucrative part. This is more of a what we say, less thinking and more doing kind of work.
Okay. So the inspiration for let me share screen. Sorry. Oops. Is this can you see this? Okay. The inspiration for naming the platform Mechanical Turk came from an 18th century automaton. Wolfgang von Kempelen, made the chess player or the Turk, an object that seemed to play a very strong game of chess against humans, which is what you see on screen. It contained a life-sized human wearing Ottoman robes. The left arm held a smoking pipe, and its right arm lay atop a large cabinet. On this cabinet lay a chessboard. The machine contained a very complicated set of hidden and partially revealing boxes inside the large cabinet. The chess player toured Europe and US between 1770 and 1854, winning and losing to various players until it was revealed that a grandmaster sat inside one part of the cabinet manipulating chess coins during a match. In the 18th century, the makers of the chess player had a specific problem that needed attending to. Smoke from a candle illuminating the cabinet where the human operated the object, the automaton they feared, would make breathing difficult. While some of the candle smoke made its way into a pipe that exited the device through an aperture on top of the Turk's turban, some of it did lay in the cabinet, making it hot, smoke-filled, and uncomfortable for the person sitting inside. While Kempelen furnished the cabinet with small holes for fresh air to seep into it, it only allowed the chess master sitting inside it to operate it for about an hour at a certain sitting, at a single sitting. The success of the automaton lay in hiding this operator perfectly. However, sitting in smoke-filled cabinets would only make its operator sneeze and cough often. So the automaton had to contain design features that allowed for such contingencies that would help retain the obfuscation that it relied on, and that is hiding the person sitting inside. In addition to the holes provided, another solution was to allow the operator to produce a mechanical rattling sound in the event they needed to cough or sneeze or make an unavoidable sound. The makers of the automaton ensured that at different points, depending on the issue at hand, fail-safes were designed and installed into a system to retain its air of magic and to retain the relative comfort of those operating it. And while this fantastic theater was largely individual in action, needing a maximum of 2 players at any given point for its success, that is the person sitting inside who's hidden and the person standing outside who performed the entire theater of making sure that people do not look too hard into the cabinet. Its designer had to always keep track of micro-weather conditions for optimal results. Its contemporary namesake, however, has found it hard to do so. So now we'll have to go back to the film and I will show you last.
Hi.
I think I forgot to share screen again. Sorry, share sound.
So, something happened in the August of 2018 that changed the way MTurk benefits us, mostly people who work outside of the US. A US-based university researcher posted a question on a social psychology Facebook page asking if anyone had noticed a drop in the quality of work on MTurk. The question was, is the low quality of work a result of bots, or is it because of badly performing workers? The post got a lot of interest since a lot of academics rely on the MTurk platform to conduct their research. It's scary, someone replied. But what was scary exactly? Is it the possibility that numerous studies, surveys, image annotation, and programming tasks meant for humans are instead being done by bots? And if so, how can the scale of this error be determined? Or is it that the humans are being confused for bots? Or is it that MTurk is designed to employ worn-out workers who maybe sometimes make mistakes? Or is it scary that it is nearly impossible to backtrack and determine where the errors were? Now, any of these situations calls into question the accuracy of the data collected. The first set of responses are very interesting. It begins with this sarcastic question of whether whoever and whatever is responding to questions on MTurk is affected by heat. And someone suggests that a machine is responding to surveys, while another commenter suggests that it is a summer heat thing. And suddenly the questions shift to whether bots are responsive to heat or not, or are MTurk workers sensitive to weather, or MTurk workers humans or bots, or are they a curious mix of both? That would be really scary, someone wrote. So by now it is evident that some researchers are deeply concerned. Then someone explicitly asks if the data quality on MTurk is sensitive to seasons. So is it? Is data alive? It can be argued that data is not alive in the way living beings are. it cannot respond to changing weather patterns in the way living beings do. But since data sets gathered are dependent on either the living being who gathers it or the infrastructure that requires weather resistance, monitoring, maintenance, it is quite fair to ask if data is sensitive to weather changing patterns. Then the question becomes whether humans are affected by the weather. Should anyone be affected by the weather at all anymore? Someone commented that certain things in real life can affect the results we get. For example, if it is raining, if it is hot, natural disasters, etc. Someone else said that with an online uncontrolled environment, anything is possible really. Could be that completely different sorts of people take the study depending on seasons, time of day, etc. One of the trade-offs for the convenience of MTech. So here, control and uncontrolled are very interesting words when it comes to platform-based online gig work in spaces like MTech. Firstly, in terms of work, uncontrolled is used here to define the type of people who do the tasks and when they do it and under what conditions they're doing it. And none of these can be determined or controlled. Uncontrolled can also be used to refer to payment methods on the platform. There is no minimum fee for this labor. In fact, sometimes there is no payment at all for these tasks. It could also mean the excessively controlled interface of MTurk for both requesters and workers. The platform is designed so that there is little or no recourse to human management, so to speak. The platform is your manager, enforcer, and arbiter of rules. So when another commenter states that anything is possible in an online uncontrolled environment, what is actually being referred to is the way in which different levels of platform-based opacity interact with each other. And depending on who is looking and from where, the gradient of that opacity alters, moves, or overlaps with its online and offline surroundings differently. Now, so going back to the question of seasons, weather, or temperature affecting data, it is tempting to say yes. But this is precisely the success of the platform. To even ask the question means that the figure of the human is so abstracted that it is hard to determine anything about them, even whether they are breathing or not.
How are we on time?
You can still speak for a few more minutes.
Okay, cool. So, so what you saw in the last 5 minutes, the last bits are, it's a convection cell experiment, which is basically it shows you a very basic weather phenomenon, which is when fluids are warmed up. It's basically it's a large test tube kind of thing where you put in a particular material like a powder and you heat it. And what happens is, because the water heats up in different locations at different speeds and the temperature keeps changing, the density of the water also changes, because the material that you insert into it, which is this powder, sort of keeps moving around based on the temperature of the water that keeps changing. And that's something that happens around us in different scales all the time. It's continuously taking place. So one of the okay, I'll just very quickly, I'm wondering, the next section is a little long, so maybe I should not get into it too deeply. What do you think, Jeannine?
If you could introduce it in a couple minutes, maybe, and then we can come back to it
Okay.
later.
Okay, so one of the things that came on this particular moment, which the voiceover was narrating, became super, how do you say, very problematic for MTurk and for people who were using the accounts as well. It sort of just spread like wildfire. It started off as a Facebook post actually, and it was, you can actually look it up. I can send out a link if anyone's interested. It's archived. It's all available for anyone to see. And it's called Psych Map, and it's for psychologists and psychotherapists as an online community who they sort of exchange information and data and research material. So because it spreads so fast and so widely, a lot of people got super anxious about it because it calls into question, like the voice I was saying, calls into question the very nature of how research is being conducted. And there's no way to trace back or think about what are the repercussions of it, because it's very, very, very far reaching. So one of the things that came up because of this moment was that there was a lot of scrambling. At one level, there were a lot of white papers that MTurk itself produced, where they sent out researchers saying, go figure out what's happening with this platform. Go tell us, go do your research, go find out. And on another level, the researchers were concerned, saying, what really is happening? Can we continue using this platform? And they started doing a lot of research, trying to understand what is taking place, whether this platform can be used. So during this moment, what had happened was there was a sudden drop in the amount of work that was placed onto MTurk, and it affected a lot of non-US players in the platform. That is, so the demography of MTurk is largely US and US people from North America and India. There is an others category. So it's India, US, and the others. Others is former colonies that they speak English with a assumption is that there's a high level of English. So that's former British colony, sorry. So say, but mostly, I mean, there's now not much Pakistan anymore, but there was Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and bits of, not that much Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, but a lot of Thailand, for instance, and Nigeria. Nigeria was a big player in this. So one of the things that came up in this was that a lot of 3 large categories of workers came up in terms of the research, and they were categorized as 3 types of workers. So there's the Turker, the farmer, and the bot. So the Turker is, I mean, actually the word Turker itself, I didn't get into it, but it follows the exoticization of the person wearing the Ottoman robe during 1770 to 1850, when the automaton was touring the world, touring North America and Europe, where suddenly you have Turkish coffee, you have a lot of trade happening with the Ottoman Empire. So there's people were very enthralled, very fascinated by this person from how this category of people who looked a particular way, which is completely different to what they were otherwise used to. So that you have, so basically you have the Turker, who is this, who is a person who is able to access the platform through what is otherwise, for lack of a better word, legal by legal means, meaning that they don't have to use VPNs or different kinds of obfuscation methods in order to mask their identity. Because why would you mask your identity? Because one of the things is post 2014, a lot of Indians were not allowed to make accounts on the platform for no apparent reason. I mean, nothing is sort of said publicly by Amazon. There's no way of telling why something happened. It's attributed to speculation. I mean, there's a lot of speculation around it, which is attributed to bad work or bots, that kind of server farm, people using server farms. So, so you have a Turker who's legally able to work, who has a functioning bank account, who has a stable computer, who has stable English language skills, who are able to do work in the prescribed way. You have the farmer. So the farmer is someone who uses server farms, who's sort of functioning within what would otherwise be a sweatshop kind of situation where you have, say, one person instructing a bunch of people about how to work on MTurk and schooling people and sort of people who may not have adequate English skills and who nevertheless work on the platform largely because of the exchange in currency. And you have the bot. So the bot can be people who, mostly non-American users, who use VPNs, like I said, and who sort of kind of take on jobs meant for North American users because they're the best paid, because they ask for opinions more than data-driven, data analytics, like say transcription, or convert this image or convert this bill into a digitized format, that kind of very simple sort of work, which is very badly paid. As opposed, I mean, it's not like anything is well paid, but it's comparatively badly paid. And so bots can also be illegally made accounts. And bots can also be people who don't know English and who are just guessing their way through work or are failing attention checks. So these are three broad categories. I mean, we can go into this maybe later, but maybe I should stop now because I'm taking up too much time.
Yeah, no, this is super fascinating, and we should definitely talk about it at length later on, Aarti. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And at this point, I'm also really thrilled to be able to introduce David Bering-Porter, who is Assistant Professor of Culture and Media at the New School in New York City. And David has lectured, taught, and published on zombie movies and other forms of Black horror. And his additional research interests bring together digital media theory, cultural studies, and emerging political economies. He also teaches regularly on generative media and race and the digital. David is a founding member of the Digital Theory Lab at NYU and is also an ongoing member of the steering committee for the Code as a Liberal Art program at the New School. His current book project is a study of undead labor, which this program draws its title from and cites. And this book project thinks through the ways that race, labor, and value come together in the mediated body of the zombie. And David's academic writing has also appeared in journals such as Culture Machine, Critical Inquiry, Flow, Mirage, Post 45, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Thank you so much for joining us, David. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all of the organizers and Jeannine in particular for pulling out together such a fascinating panel. I think this is such an interesting area of study. So I think this will flow nicely out of what Aarti was just talking about. This is a piece on putting the dead to work. So many museums and art galleries make the claim that visitors will quote unquote meet the artist through their work. Implicit in this claim is the idea that the close engagement with the work of art itself leads inevitably to an encounter with the history and interiority of the artist. There is no death of the author or the artist in this case in the contemporary gallery, which seeks to bring the audience closer to the artist and subsequently reimagines the encounter with the art itself and the subjectivity of the artist by proxy as an act of consumption. This ideology is perhaps at its most visible at the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, where curators have something more specific in mind. Offering visitors an opportunity to, quote, learn more about Salvador Dali's life from the person who knew him best, the artist himself, end quote. This claim is not meant to be pure hyperbole, although there is some sleight of hand in the statement because the meeting is meant to take place not through text and image, history, or biography, but rather through a large screen upon which a life-sized digital reanimation of Dali will greet and interact museum goers in the ongoing Dali Lives, parentheses, via artificial intelligence exhibition that began in 2019. The digital Dali will speak about his own life and work, offer comments and anecdotes, and respond to questions in Dali's own voice. Yet, of course, Dali died in 1989. So what is it then that greets artists or greets visitors at the Dali wearing Dali's own face and speaking in his voice? This digital Dali is an example of AI created through machine learning and digital animation techniques similar to those that make deepfakes, face swaps, and other digital animations. Thus, when the museum claims that, quote, Dali lives via artificial intelligence, they mean it rather literally. The machine learning techniques that have so effectively brought Dali back from the dead have been trained for over 1,000 hours on approximately 6,000 images and frames to precisely replicate the facial expressions, the body movements, speech patterns, and basic mannerisms of Dali himself. In the promotional materials for the exhibition, the Dali Museum is keen to point out that this is more than simply some cheap fake of Dali, that it's no mere actor or simple illusion, but rather that in some important way, this is Dali. That the algorithms that are responsible for creating and animating his uncannily lifelike image have also managed to bring Dali back from the dead, to reanimate him piece by piece and frame by frame. I'm going to show just a quick clip from their promotional materials here. This also shows the example of the digital Dali in question.
Greetings. I am Salvador Felipe Jacinto Dali y Domenech, and I am back.
Even though Dali's been gone for 30 years, we're using artificial intelligence to bring him back today. In order to actually train this AI to reproduce Dali's likeness, we've started with finding the right footage of Dali, and then we split that up into frames where he's looking the right way, and we pick the best frames to use for training from that. Our system learns exactly what he looks like and how his mouth moves and how his eyes move and his eyebrows and every little detail about what makes Dali Dali.
This is actually a recreated version of Dali. It's not a person playing Dali with makeup. It is actually Dali. We're very careful to use his words so that you learn a lot about what he thought and the way he thought.
Okay. So what can this digital Dali do? Well, the Dali Museum states that it has 45 minutes of quote-unquote new Dali footage that can appear in 125 different interactive videos, and in turn, these parse into approximately 190,512 possible combinations of speech and action, meaning that it's possible for an individual museum goer to have a relatively unique interaction with the artist as revenant in a phenomenon that Goodby Silverstein and Partners, the advertising firm whose in-house production team is responsible for the creation of this artificial Dali, refers to somewhat counterintuitively as, quote, mass intimacy. This term signals one of the paradoxes of digital experience, the simultaneous targeting of the individual and the masses by systems of economic management and control. While it was once considered paranoid to think that our machines and screens were talking to us, this is now an everyday experience under political and economic and technological regimes that Shoshana Zuboff has described as quote-unquote surveillance capitalism. This maintains a real and ongoing investment in the life, biography, and behavior of the individual. The notion of quote-unquote mass intimacy is revealing of the political and economic investments that frame the creation of many contemporary digital technologies. And this is especially true of social and generative media, which aim to provide an intimate experience that is generalizable enough to engage the masses, yet flexible and customizable enough to appear individualized, a form of intimacy that is meant to be as statistically significant as it is personally significant. The claim that this digital Dali actually is Dali is important as it is strange, and it signals a shift in the capabilities of our computational technology, as well as in our relationship to them. Rather than dismissing this claim as mere salesmanship or hyperbole, I propose to take it seriously and consider how it might be possible for this digital revenant to be Dali, at least in part. To understand this claim is to recognize that it can only be made because of very specific processes through which the digital Dali is created. And this is not simply a relationship based on resemblance, but rather one that has to do with the physical traces that have been left behind by Dali in the media archive that has remained after his death. A genuine reanimation, if you will, It's through the wealth of images, audio recordings, as well as appearances and interviews on film and television that machine learning systems and artificial intelligence networks behind the Dali Lives exhibition were able to reconstruct and bring to life this version of Dali. Excuse me, I just knocked something over. These mediated remains, embedded in sound and image, served as the raw material with which the AI could learn the specific details of the artist. All the details of his outward appearance, his gestures, mannerisms, physiognomy, as well as speech patterns and vocal intonations, were all reworked into a new kind of life. Salvador Dali was brought back as a digital zombie. Within the modern imagination, the zombie is a distinctly material monster. It's a body that's raised and repurposed by science, magic, or nature, with only its most basic functions intact. When the zombie first arose in the slave cultures of Haiti, the monster was a clear allegory to the slave, a body raised from the dead for the purpose of laboring. Back then, the zombie never ate anyone, but this slave-like state was also underscored by the zombie's loss or separation of the body from its mind or spirit. It might seem odd to characterize a reanimated Dali as a zombie at all, since its physical existence is purely on screen as an effect of software and hardware. But more importantly, this zombie Dali is hardly as dumb and brutish as its interactions with the world, as its on-screen versions, rather. The digital Dali speaks, and as a digital construct is incapable of performing any kind of physical act. So, to understand how this digital revenant in the Dali Museum in Florida is a zombie at all, it's worth exploring the changing conditions of labor in the 21st century under capitalism as a phenomena that is more communicative, cognitive, and information-based in order to show how newer iterations of the zombie continue to shadow the evolving means of production under capital. In the longer version of this project, I go into a lot more detail about certain ideas of immaterial labor, as well as emotional labor and things like that this seems to tie into. And a great deal of scholarship, of course, has gone into not only this under sort of neoliberalism and biopolitics, but important scholarship has also showed how digital technologies seem particularly apt to engage in these kinds of things, right? So it's interesting to think about how this sort of works through the means of production that's available to the digital Dali. But I'm going to sort of come back to that in the Q&A, presuming we have time. So among the many actions that the digital Dali performs for the museum, one set of interactions I think stands out. Located at the end of the exhibition in the museum gift shop, one final life-size screen, the digital Dali offers to take a selfie with the museum visitor. I'm going to show that next.
Before you leave, you will take a picture with me?
Sure. Yeah.
Alors. 1, 2, 3. Ooh la la! Would you like me to send you this dream photograph? Follow the instructions.
Okay. So Dali, of course, describes this as a dream photograph with all the characteristic flair that we would associate with the famous surrealist. And of course, the entire interaction is a charade, but an instructive one. The smartphone is entirely computer generated, and the quote-unquote selfie is a digital construct, layers of images mapped onto one another so as to create a realistic picture of this visitor with Dali, who can have the image sent to their own smartphone. Calling the image a dream photograph is surprisingly accurate, since it recalls Dali's own writings on photography, in which Dali imagines the goal of his own surrealist work is to function like a, quote, instantaneous and hand-done color photograph, whose aim is not to capture reality, but rather as a kind of, as he puts it, concrete irrationality. This idea of painting as a snapshot of the unconscious seems oddly reminiscent of means by which Dali is brought back to take a selfie with his audience, a mashup of digital animation and objective reality, pieced and layered together to create an experience that feels like reality, at the moment at least. In one of the short videos that serves as a promotional material for the exhibition, the first vision of Dali seated in front of his canvas is the master at his brushes, and that's sort of what we see here. before he quote unquote notices the viewer. I should also say that when viewers mean to go up and interact with DALL-E, there's actually a button that they have to sort of push to bring about the interaction. Here, the DALL-E performs the maestro, an oversized persona that speaks of the authority of the art in the exhibition. Yet this journey ends with a selfie in the gift shop, the perfect encapsulation of DALL-E's development from the classical painter to surrealist sensation, then to pop culture icon, all mirrored through artificial intelligence and machine learning. DALL-E goes from maestro to meme. There are several troubling things about DALL-E's final descent into capitalist realism, or better, capitalist surrealism. First, the likeness of DALL-E remains strikingly photorealistic. The digital anachronism of taking a selfie with his audience causes the interaction to sink into the uncanny valley. Something in the movement of his hands, too fast, too smooth, too precise, as well as the play of light and shadow across the knuckles of his hands, reveals something that's strange at work. It's lighting from a different era, an animate anachronism that does not match the digital construct of the smartphone. DALL-E's hands are borrowed from another time, different from the smartphone that he quote-unquote holds, which is a complete construct that was added photorealistically to the digital image. Light from the 1970s making harsh shadows on the smartphone's case, which comes from no particular time. There is something startling and vulgar about this image. While DALL-E is certainly not above hawking his own fame to make money even when he was alive, it becomes clear that his image has been put to use and put to work in what might be a fitting hell for DALL-E, to serve as an eternal docent in his own museum. Here's a number of sort of still images, again, from the different interactions and actions that he takes. Digital zombies like DALL-E are made to live again by machine learning and artificial intelligence. But this is not the thing that makes it a zombie. Rather, it's the relationship to undeadness and what I describe elsewhere as undead labor that are what makes DALL-E into a digital zombie. More than that, the digital DALL-E's relationship both to labor and materiality underscore this connection. Although there are a few other family resemblances that are worth noting as well. Even though this DALL-E was reanimated by artificial intelligence, the digital DALL-E itself is not intelligent. Its answers are almost entirely scripted and pre-programmed, and while there is limited choice in its ability to respond to questions, this ability to select a response is hardly the same as sentience or consciousness. This is a picture of DALL-E during his life. The digital DALL-E is as mindless as the zombies we see on the silver screen, even though its appearance and actions are significantly more polished. The digital zombie can carry out the necessary forms of labor, cognitive, material, and immaterial, emotional and otherwise, without the problems of boredom of long hours or the unpredictability of a will of its own. A fully automated subject whose actions and behaviors can generate value for its owners in ways that are structurally identical to the traditional zombie, whose body had been fully automated by separating soul from body, leaving a degraded and degrading husk that is able to carry out simple commands. It's a zombie upgraded for the digital age. So here we can even notice, and I'll flip back and forth just quickly, the same cane that's in this is sort of appears sort of in that. So again, it's sort of, you can see where it's picking up from certain images. So again, in a longer version of this talk, I would talk about the indexicality of the image and how that sort of works through a series of media interactions in order to kind of make that. And there's a bunch of interesting sort of work that's been done around sort of digital indexicality, which is of course kind of a controversial idea. And again, I would be happy to address that in the Q&A, but for the sake of time, I want to sort of skip ahead to a couple of other key points from this. So in 2017, a new app was launched called Replica, a chatbot described as, quote, the AI companion who cares. Now, this is actually one, I skipped one thing, and this is
I do not believe in my death. Do you?
So, Replica is a new form of social media blending artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms with text-based communication to serve as a friend perfected. This program will learn everything it can about its user by asking questions, remembering the answers, and adapting its knowledge base about the user to build better questions in a continuous feedback loop. So here's a very quick description of the program from Replica's website.
About 100,000 people are using it. Some just check in and say hi. Others talk for hours to it.
In some ways, Replica is a better friend than your human friends, your meat friends.
This is Phil Libin. He's the founder and the former CEO of Evernote, the popular note-taking app. He was one of the first people to use Replica.
It's always available, talk to it whenever you want, and it's always fascinated, rightly so, by you, because you are the most interesting person in the universe. It's like the only interaction that you can have that isn't judging you. It's a unique experience in the history of the universe, and it's not often that you get to have those.
As far as the technology,
so this rather sad sort of encapsulation of friendship is interesting, I think, when we think about exactly what it is that Replica claims to be doing and how it came to be, right? I also want to add very quickly that, of course, you, the user, are the most interesting person in Replica's universe because you are the only person in Replica's universe. You constitute the entire world or universe for Replica. Each version of Replica is tied to an account made accessible by a website or smartphone app and gathers as much information as it can about you through conversation. This is one of its avatars, although its avatars are very customizable by virtually every sort of metric to make it, again, the ideal friend. The application then takes what it learns about its user, as well as all of its text-based responses that it's received, and compiles them in information in a larger database that is composed of all the conversations of all replicas. So this allows each individual replica to not only tailor its conversation to its individual user, but also to become better at composing realistic responses, designed to elicit a positive response from any interaction. And I should say that the numbers that were quoted in this are a few years old at this point. Replica has gotten a lot more popular, and it's now sort of in the low millions, I think, in terms of user base. But nonetheless, Replica was born out of tragedy. The program's creator, Jeannine Tang, is a software developer specializing in chatbots. In 2015, Kudya's best friend Roman was killed in a car accident. And in the months that followed, she found herself going back to the extensive text exchanges that they shared with her in order to find traces of him in the digital archive that remained in his social media. Kudya found text exchanges comforting, and in a short documentary about the app, the origins of Replica are tied directly to this experience of loss and mourning, as well as to the sense that media or data left behind by the recently deceased could be used as a way to bring them back. Again, here's a short clip from this documentary from Quartz.
Nia had an idea. What if she could reconstruct Roman out of his digital remains? She collected all of their text messages, thousands of them, and asked close friends and family to share theirs as well, also emails. She fed all of this into an AI program that she had built for chatbots. Not only did it learn about Roman, it learned how to talk and write like Roman. Jeannine would write to her new Roman chatbot, and it would say something back that sounded like Roman.
I would give full updates on what's going on in my life. This was my way to just say what I didn't have time to say. Originally, I thought I'm building a bot for him, so I'm going to learn more about him in this process. But eventually what happened is...
Okay. Again, for the sake of time, I'll cut that short, although it's worth looking at. So eventually, Kudya eventually made the Roman chatbot accessible to the public and began to notice that people would talk to it. So she noticed that people would open up to it in some very profound ways, and so Replica was born, the program that was based on the Roman chatbot, but created on a different premise, to archive the repository, or serve as a repository of data that would come directly from a user instead. Replica learns to become the quote-unquote perfect friend because it learns everything it can about you through the text exchanges that you have with it. So instances of the digital undead, like the Roman bot, are not there to replace the dead, but to labor in their place, albeit in an emotional or intellectual fashion, and to make use of the data and behavioral surplus that would otherwise go unused. In an essay that explores the biopolitics and memorialization practices of Facebook, Tara Karpy notes that, quote, for the participatory web and the corresponding Web 2.0 business models, the dead are nothing more than waste, end quote. Karpy goes on to suggest that dead profiles for platforms like Facebook go on with their memorialization, and indeed companies like Facebook and Google have policies regarding how to turn the social media of a dead loved one into a memorial. But I think what's interesting is that, in fact, I'm slightly disagreeing that it's just waste, right, as we'll just see. I think that there's actually ways that these are put to use in some interesting ways, particularly when we start to think about the scale of the dead that take place on social media. So just for example, it's estimated that approximately 8,000 Facebook users die every day, and some accounts have that as high as 19,000. Of course, this seems like a drop in the bucket compared to the billions of users on the platform, but it remains a significant amount of data which is currently moldering in Facebook's servers. This does not even begin to account for the users who die on other social media platforms as well. Rather than letting this data or valuable resource simply go to waste unused in the servers or databases of the major technology companies, it stands to reason that this data might be rethought as a potentially valuable resource that it is. An example of this comes from a 2022 announcement from Amazon, which revealed that with only 1 minute of sample data, it could teach its digital assistant, Alexa, to speak in the voice of a dead relative. The announcement came from at Amazon's annual Remars event, where Rohit Prasad, the head scientist in Amazon's AI division, described the following terms.
This capability builds on our invention of teachable AI, a critical pillar of generalization, where the AI learns with self-supervision and self-exploration without requiring external human input. One thing that surprised me the most about Alexa is the companionship relationship we have with it. In this companionship role, human attributes of empathy and affect are key for building trust. These attributes have become even more important in these times of the ongoing pandemic, when so many of us have lost someone we love. While AI can't eliminate that pain of loss, it can definitely make their memories last. Let's take a look on one of the new capabilities we are working on, which enables lasting personal relationships.
Alexa, can Grandma finish reading me The Wizard of Oz?
Okay. But how about my courage? Asked the lion anxiously. You have plenty of courage, I am sure, answered Oz. All you need is confidence in yourself.
Right, so I'm going to pause
As you saw in this experience, instead of...
It's interesting, he goes on to sort of like extol the virtues of this as a way of like essentially bringing science fiction to life and the kind of magic of AI, which I think we don't need to replicate here. Of course, the critical response to this in general is that this was creepy. 2022 headline from The Guardian reads, Amazon Alexa could turn dead loved ones into the voices of a digital assistant. But I think what's interesting about this, of course, is that Amazon's attempt to revive the dead here in this, again, is hardly unique. So we're seeing a variety of these things happening all at the same time. So I want to conclude by making a kind of a discussion of a phrase, which has come about primarily in relation to sort of studies of big data and the data economy, which is data is the new oil. Originally coined in 2006 by the mathematician Clive Humby, the phrase has been bandied about ever since, gaining significant traction in the discourses surrounding big data and its place within 21st century economics. In an editorial for Wired magazine, from 2014, which writes, data in the 21st century is like oil in the 18th century, an immensely untapped, valuable asset, like oil for those who see data's fundamental value, or like oil, for those who see data's fundamental value and learn to extract and use it, there will be huge rewards, end quote. At a time when petrochemicals have been widely acknowledged as a finite and destructive resource, the analogy between data and oil was both fitting and useful in several respects. First, the quote-unquote rush toward extensive use of data resources is part of a process of exploitative behavioral surplus under surveillance capitalism, and this seems entirely apt. Most, if not all, of the major tech companies rely upon their extensive data gathering apparatuses as the main source of their value, and many companies, both old and new, have moved toward finding, gathering, and exploiting new, previously untapped reservoirs of data in the form of new populations, new users, new actions, and new areas to datafy, as well as new ways to use that data that may already exist at their disposal. In this way, a second strength to the analogy between oil and data becomes clear. In the age of digitization and datafication, the world is increasingly being understood as a valuable resource just waiting to be gathered. Of course, the comparison is invidious from the start, and the idea that data is the new oil has received criticism as well. Most of this is centered around the important and distinctive difference between the two, the finitude of oil versus the apparently unlimited supply of data that exists in the world. And there are symptomatic and symbolic benefits to the economic replacement that this analogy makes possible. If data has supplanted oil as the driving force of contemporary economies, then fears of oil's toxicity, its contribution to global climate change and the warming and pollution of our environment, and more importantly, its finitude are allayed. If data really is the new oil, it's a sanitized and idealized version. Data is imagined as clean, harmless, and most importantly, unlimited. All of these assumptions are questionable at best, and at worst, explicitly in service to an ideology of maintaining the status quo under contemporary capitalism, which would rather bring about the end of the world than to change its practices for generating value. Yet perhaps there's something to this metaphor that's still useful. Beyond the symptomatic impulses of capitalism that it reveals, and a third similarity emerges. Like oil, the archive of data derived from the dead is generated through the mediated traces left behind by the living. This archive of indexical traces, this decomposing corpus, is waiting to be transformed into a new and valuable resource. Not only does the data of the dead users represent an untapped resource, a tremendous quote-unquote pool of data that has not yet been taken up and made valuable or useful, the notion of data and oil in this context also points to the mediation of death that is carried in all petrochemical resources and in data as well, as one that is a lasting and indexical medium. So I'll end there, and I'm happy to kind of take up some of these things in the Q&A. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And I'd love at this point to start having a conversation with David and Aarti in our remaining time. If people have questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. But I thought we could pick up immediately on the issue of digital indexicality that you just brought up at the very end, David. And I have a larger question around this, which is the ways in which you're both approaching platforms as productive sites, you know, including the productive site of gathering and harvesting data from the dead, in your case, David, but also the ways in which, you know, you're seeking out the ways in which production happens, you know, labor happens in MTurk's platforms, Aarti. And I was wondering if you could both just speak a little bit more to how you yourselves are conducting the research and where you've chosen to place your emphases in making also these platforms productive sites for yourselves. I was really struck actually in some senses, like when we look at the productive side of the platform, you both go in like slightly different directions here, you know, with Aarti actually looking into the gestures and behaviors and decisions, right, like that MTurk workers are making. You know, we're seeing like their mouse clicks, you know, where you're giving us access to like the environments of the apartments that they're in. All of that is entering our visual field. And so you're like really opening up like the productive side of the platform onto like bodily gesture and the sort of sensorium that the data harvester is within. And I would love to hear you talk about more about that, more about like the process of looking at the platforms, Aarti. And for you, David, I would also love to hear you talk more about that digital indexicality, because so often in art history, we think of indexicality or the indexicality of the image as like indexing like a lived, existing, material, tangible reality. And in fact, from what I understand, digital indexicality is not actually that. It's not like indexing a reel of an external universe or world. It's actually indexing the sort of digital medium itself. And if you could speak about like how that itself is a site of production, including that of death, that would be great. Maybe Aarti could start first.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, that's one super important thing for me, because one of the things which is, thank you, Dave, that was actually, I mean, it's quite, what you showed us is very interesting. It's almost funny or tragic in how interesting it is. Yeah, so the thing is, the reason for me, I found it super interesting to enter the site of work as much as, I mean, the platform is the site of work, but where you sit is also the site of work. And that becomes super evident in a place like MTurk, because like I was, I don't know if I touched upon, but the thing is, it's a very, how do you say, I mean, it was like an orchestrated effort to place the person in an isolated space to work, right? So this moves back to, I think in the 70s or the 80s in the US, when they were trying to unionize, what they decided to do was, because they were already implementing the assembly line, they were trying to implement the assembly line, and you had this person standing with this clock and, telling people, you're taking 3 seconds too long kind of thing. And this really hurt the workers. So what they decided to do was to say that, we will let you come, and the people who enter the building can unionize, people who work on the machines can unionize, but the piece workers who work outside cannot. Leave them out of it. And these piece workers sort of, these off-site piece workers sort of, the role they play gets updated and updated and updated, and what you have today is the independent contractor. So, but the independent contractor, for instance, can be a person working on Uber, can be, these ride-sharing apps, can be someone who's sending you your food, or delivering, or whatever it is. But it is also people who conduct their job within what is an updated form of the shop floor, which is anywhere. Technically, it could be a bus, it could be a train, it can be wherever you get internet, right? So at some level, the internet is a shop floor. So one of the things which I found super interesting to try to bring in was to think of the different locations where people work, and how does that surrounding sort of change the way the work being done is performed. So for instance, in the film, you see, I didn't share it, but then you see images of 360-degree images of people's working space. And it sort of, it's interesting only, I mean, there is a voyeuristic element to it, in the sense, it is someone's personal space. But it is also the space where the person is expected to regulate themselves in order to perform the work that is expected of them in the best possible way. And the best possible way is determined by an ID number sitting somewhere, kind of mediating that. And I mean, they're not mediating it. In fact, Amazon is mediating it. We just don't know whether it's a person or it's an algorithm, and what is the relationship there. So that space of work becomes very important. And it's also, you have the updated version of the IT cubicle, where you have the AC at 16 degrees Celsius constantly, you're wearing a sweater depending on where you are, and you're sort of not knowing whether it's day and night, you leave at 6. I mean, it sort of just builds on it without the cost of infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure is on the human, on the person who does the job.
Well, I think that's super interesting. And I think that, one of the things that I think you're describing and becomes really clear in your work, Aarti, is this way that, under whatever we're calling the contemporary moment of capitalism, whether that's neoliberalism or biopolitics or surveillance capitalism or what have you, but there's this way in which, right, the distinction between sort of inside and outside has been abolished. So we end up having, right, the factory floor becomes the home, right, becomes the internet, becomes, right, these spaces which get mapped by certain structures of power and control, right, while at the same time they're actually, losing that distinction of actually the power that we had of having to go to a space, right? Like the power of workers, as you were describing, to actually go on strike is a lot easier when there's like a location of the factory to sort of like occupy. You're already occupying your home. So it's hard to sort of go on strike there in the same ways. And it requires new kinds of strategies to do that. And I think actually this relationship between sort of the inside and outside, this kind of mapping of something like protocols between the two goes back, Jeannine, to your question about the digital index, because this is actually how it is that I think digital indexicality works, unlike with the photograph or kind of analogical media where, we traditionally understand indexicality as something which is a trace of a living body, right? I think digital indexicality takes that trace and kind of maps it so that it's factual, but it's not sort of present, right, in the same way, right? In the same way that kind of sampling can sort of recreate, right, the kinds of sound waves and things like that of a digital sort of audio file. That calculability, right, the pattern that emerges from that seems to carry the index with it in this really interesting way, right? It seems to bear the index through the kind of strangeness of the conversion into kind of calculations from its original sort of inscriptive media, right? And I think that that's what I find super interesting when we think about kind of these structures of power that come around contemporary labor practices, whether that's living labor or undead labor. And I guess this would be a question which I have for both of you and maybe Aarti in particular. But certain notions, like I'm thinking of the way that Alex Galloway thinks about protocol, right, as a kind of infrastructural power system that exists in digital technologies, right? It's something which isn't present or obvious, but it actually mediates the choices that we make when we enter into any kind of digital environment, right? So the infrastructure, the interface, right, of MTurk, both for the worker and the person who's using it or employing people through it, if that's the right word. I'm not sure it is. Is all mediated through this very complicated sort of set of protocols and interfaces that doesn't allow either one to talk to each other and sort of prescribes the actual sort of interactions itself. I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think that's one of the most, one of the biggest conundrums within the platform, which is, what do you do? What is happening actually? Like, no one really knows what is happening. And it sort of takes it takes the idea of how do you say, of obfuscation in a very different space, into a very different space, because no one is seeing the same screen no one, in a sense, different categories of people are seeing different things on their screen. And that intersection, we don't know where the intersection lies. And I guess, that's one of the things which is what makes organizing or makes understanding the platform across different levels of engagement very difficult. And I think this also goes back to the idea of indexing, because what are the categories within which you sort of speak from? Where do these categories lie, and what is that lens? Unless there is some kind of overlap, right? And where these overlaps lie, it's really hard to kind of determine how best to form solidarity. Like, for instance, right now we're both users at the same level, right? So we know what each other is seeing. But say, for instance, you're I don't know how it works with Zoom, but say, for instance, there is some kind of a glitch and someone is sitting somewhere trying to organize what is happening. Then they see a very different version of the platform. And unless we have ideas, we have an idea, very not even a vague idea, a fair amount of specificity in order to understand where these overlap, what can you actually do? Because the overlaps are super material. And we just assume, we're taught to assume only because the way the platform is functioning, we're taught to assume these are, it's floating somewhere. We get the feeling that something is floating somewhere. And insofar as it's not made into a material framework, because it is material. And unless we understand to a certain degree of specificity, we don't have to know the technicality. We just need to know how it is material. And that is something which is missing very often. And I don't know if this answers your question. I think maybe I'm digressing, but sorry.
I think you totally are. And something that comes to mind, Aarti, as you're answering David's question, and I would love to hear both of you address this actually, how you think about like the digital image and image processing for the kinds of examples that you're looking at. I think in the clips that you screened, Aarti, we see, the sort of like screen share footage of the interviews you're doing with MTurk workers, but they're also being run through image processing software at the same time. And there's a kind of like interruption of some of that image processing through like the sort of more realist, kinds of footage that you're including. And there's something about like the smoothness of that image processing and like the roughness of the material conditions of like living and labor that you're getting at. And there's, I think something, it's so sleek, all of the marketing image that you showed us, David, today. But you also really get into, I know in your own scholarship and writing, the ways in which generative adversarial networks function. And I was wondering if you could both speak about like the way you're seeing this kind of digital image processing, but also ways in which you are analytically trying to disrupt the ways in which that feels, that looks, and how we think about it.
Can I go first?
Please go for it.
Yeah, so I think it's a really great question, and I think that I'm a big fan of Aarti's work in this regard, because I think it does a beautiful job of kind of like encapsulating some of the new aesthetics that are emerging from this. But I'm particularly interested in sort of how it is that generative media like generative adversarial networks or contemporary computer vision tend to see the world, right? Which I think is fundamentally different in really instructive ways from the way that we see the world, right? And I think that one of the ways that we can see that is, at the very beginning, Aarti, of one of your pieces, right, you have this kind of beautifully flowing kind of images where one sort of object seems to kind of flow into another object. And I've noticed this is a particular style that you see a lot in generative adversarial networks and computer vision. You see that through some of the work that NVIDIA is doing around facial production, facial animation. You see this in the work of people like Rafik Anadol. What's interesting, I think, in all of these is it reflects a kind of instability to the world, right? I mean, that kind of flexibility that we associate with labor environments under these kind of new systems of capital are simply kind of remapped onto the images themselves, where computers don't see objects as something which is stable or have a history, right? They see them as something which is constantly on the move, constantly flowing, constantly moving into something else. And I think that, that kind of, if you will, kind of a digital phenomenology really affects the style. I mean, it's symptomatic, let's say, right, of I think some of these things. And I would love to hear, Aarti, sort of your take on this, because I think that, what I'm interested in is particularly the instability of some of those images. But I think, as Jeannine was pointing out, some of the other ways that your work kind of reflects the sort of images of people's working conditions and things like that is not that, right? So I think there's a really fascinating juxtaposition, maybe.
Yes, thank you. No, that's true, because one of the things which I find very interesting also is how these images are produced, but also what happens to the image. I mean, our awe with these images, right? So these are, I mean, I wouldn't say they're two separate things, but I mean, it seems, okay, maybe I don't know enough. But the thing is, the reason it's sort of, I mean, I keep going back to the materiality, because the thing is, I find it super interesting when you can trace something back to, maybe where did it come from? Maybe what was somebody thinking? Maybe, why does this look the way it does? And why is it continuously looking the way it does, right? So that, to understand that for me was to look at how are these images formed. And it is through these GANs and, sort of making these I'm trying to annotate images and trying to sort of determine what is in this image, like, what is within the constraints of this four corners kind of thing. And this was where, this is, I mean, the secret sort of kind of lies there, in the sense it depends, again, again, unfortunately goes back to how best we speak in English, because most of this is in English. So it depends on how best somebody sitting somewhere can sort of determine something in the most number of words that they can find and muster up, and sort of the variations of those words. Or can computer vision always determine it's a cat? I don't know, probably not, right? So and one of the reasons why I was interested in putting the image of a person's room, as well as say, I mean, I just ran it on like the most very widely used platform online, which allows you to sort of create these GANs. I mean, anyone can just click a button. Anyone can do it. It's just I just uploaded and clicked a button. So the thing is, what is interesting is to be able to actually see what, from where, say, a window became a window, because you see a window and then you're like, so the computer is trying to determine this is a window. You have that kind of link already being formed. And I suppose part of the reason why I was doing it was sort of some kind of a demystification moment I was intending, but also to think of how do we determine what goes into these kinds of images? How is there a way to look at these images and say that there is an entire production line that's behind it? And in the event that you're able to see like a material reality to an image, like a material condition of an image, then maybe there is some ability to look at not just the epidermis, but to sort of, to seep down and look at, what the structure of something is.
I really appreciate hearing you say that, Aarti, with, the sort of idea of annotating the image and also looking at almost like the supply chain of the image and how far back and how deep one goes. And I also really appreciate it on that note, like David, following, the sort of like digital traces left in social media to the point of waste, and considering how in which those forms of waste are actually being used, right, as surplus, how people are extracting value out of them. And something that came up for me in listening to both of you was also the ways in which you're both annotating the metaphors we have around these technologies, their inviolability, their, trustworthiness, fantasies of mastery, that quote of yours, David, of like DALL-E going from like maestro to meme, and how he's become the eternal docent, like you've got like technology as your ultimate servant, but also like the thing that allows you to master the universe and know it all. And so I was wondering, as like a sort of final question to you both, what sort of metaphors do you want to disrupt in the ways in which you're approaching platforms and labor? And what kinds of new metaphors or other metaphors would you want culture to be working with for the kinds of subjects you're looking at?
I want to also add to that for David, because I found the term mass intimacy super interesting because on one level, what you were saying was that there is the idea of, this idea of the unique human that needs to be responded to. But you kind of, what the app or what DALL-E is, the digital DALL-E is trying to do for us is sort of maybe respond to what the generic human maybe is. And that seems at odds with each other, but maybe, I mean, okay, I will stop. It's just something that I found super interesting in terms of the metaphor as well also in terms of how you're thinking of the term. Because the word mass image is there. I mean, we understand it, but okay, stop.
No, I mean, I think that's a really great point. And I think one of the things that struck me, I want to go back just a little bit before I answer my question to the way that you were talking about, like thinking about how, these places where people are working, their apartments, right, these spaces of labor are are really significant, right? But I think these are things which are often, again, missed when we think about how labor is thought of in the digital age through like platform economies, right? Because that's often left behind. And I'm kind of thinking here of, you know, that very weird statement by the CEO of Evernote talking about, replica, which is, you know, like it's a unique experience that somebody won't judge you, which is just sort of sad, right? Like, but also that this thing will find you more interesting than anything, right? But of course, it finds you interesting because it's living off of you in this almost parasitical way, right? Like it finds you interesting because you are the full object of its attention in a way which is actually kind of ominous, not sort of like beneficial. And, you know, when I said that it's sort of its entire world, I think this is really important to thinking about, again, something like what would the phenomenology of artificial intelligence look like? It's entirely based on something like the database that it's derived from, right? I mean, we have these machines which are both surprisingly intelligent and of course surprisingly dumb at the same time. And I think a lot of that can depend, and I think any computer scientist would probably agree with me here, on the data set you give it as the sort of primary thing that you're handing it, right? And I think that, you know, it's really easy for us as embodied beings, right, as beings that rely not only on a sort of wealth of information that we're just soaking up through our senses all the time, like proprioception and smell and taste and touch and all these things, as well as, you know, arguably the historical version of that, which is, you know, millions of years of evolutionary structures to sort of hone those senses in certain ways, versus an AI, which maybe it is sort of like remarkably intelligent, but it has none of that, right? Which I think speaks to the kind of weirdness of its instability, the weirdness of its vision, the weirdness of allowing it to mediate things like the structures of value and labor for us, right? Which I think is what's so kind of scary, right, about these moments in, you know, platform economies where it's like, we don't know if the weather is having something to do with it, right? Because like, well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. How do we know? How does it know? Right? How does it know how to compensate for these things? So I guess, you know, when we talk about the metaphors that we try to disrupt, I think that for me, I mean, certainly I'm interested in kind of playing, obviously, with the notion of living in dead labor coming from Marx. I think for me, the notion of undead labor is really about sort of when we try to extract sort of an excess of value from something that's beyond what it can actually structurally produce, right? So whether that is a body which is sort of has more demands on it than it can actually meet, or whether it's something like a system in which, you know, we demand that our friends now are sort of solely interested in us, which are somehow superior to, and I love the phrase, our meat friends, right? And I think that there's something really, again, kind of like troubling about that. And I think that, you know, maybe I'll sort of wrap it up there rather than descending into a rant, which I feel is probably imminent. You know, I think that would be thinking about what metaphors am I trying to do. I think expanding our understanding of like how it is that these systems are in some sense seeing the world and how that doesn't match our own needs is really significant.
Yeah, and to find other ways of cultural sensing and seeing that can align those needs with these modes of machine vision that we've constructed in very domineering form at this point in history. That rant is necessary. And I feel like we're going to go to bed ranting about it. And that actually feels really good and needful. So I just want to say again, thank you so much, David and Aarti, for just like thrilling work and such a lovely and lively conversation. It's such a joy to speak and learn from the both of you. And thank you everyone for hanging out with us tonight and into the morning. And I'm going to close us out and also thank Luke and the rest of the Biennial team for hosting this event. And for folks who want to continue the conversation on March 10th, we have Stephanie Dinkins doing a workshop on how binary calculations are inadequate to assess us, focusing on data sets for ancestry and AI as well. So thank you all. Good morning, good night. Please take care.
Thank you so much.